The Washington Commanders are collapsing right in front of our eyes. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso. With the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. Make sure that you listen to every episode of Locked On NFL on Amazon Music. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the mastermind, Ross Jackson. On today's episode, we're going to talk about whether Saquon Barkley is the NFL MVP.
Ooh.
Also, can we trust the Kansas City Chiefs? But first, let's talk about two teams that are collapsing in front of our eyes. First, the Washington Commanders and the Houston Texans. Before we do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the second half of the NFL season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Ross, we're seeing it. The Commanders have hit the cliff.
Yeah, man, no doubt about it. And look, if you've been paying attention for a while, this is no surprise to you.
Absolutely. And my guy David Harrison from Locked On Commanders talked about the big-time loss to the Dallas Cowboys.
The Dallas Cowboys were shorthanded and underperforming, yet they still come away from the Washington Commanders' home stadium with a 34-26 win. This is David Harrison of the Locked On Commanders podcast, and despite having a clear upper hand on paper, this is why they play the game, as the cliche says, and the Washington Commanders were not able to take advantage of a Dallas Cowboys team that, honestly, coming into the week, a lot of people had said they had quit on themselves and quit on their coaching staff, and their season was ultimately done. It was just up for other teams to take advantage of it. The Washington Commanders not taking advantage of early takeaways. The fact that the Washington Commanders defense held the Dallas Cowboys to just 3 first-half points. Unfortunately, the Commanders also only scoring 3 first-half points. Second half had a lot more scoring despite some late-game heroics from Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin, still falling up short. Now they've lost 3 in a row with the Tennessee Titans coming in to this exact same building next week, looking to do the same thing the Dallas Cowboys did. So a lot of questions to answer for the Commanders over the Thanksgiving week and weekend. For more on this and everything Commanders related, check out the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ross, this literally might have been the most wild finish to a game,
Man.
of the entire week and one of the wildest finishes of the entire season. This game was super low scoring. It was 10-9 going into the fourth quarter. Dallas puts up 24 points in the fourth quarter, takes back an onside kick for a touchdown. The Commanders tie it up with another Hail Mary to Terry McLaurin and then miss the extra point to basically lose themselves the game. An insane game, really. But again, it's the classic Cliff Kingsbury offensive collapse that we have seen on multiple levels from college to the pros, and got to give credit to Robert Mays from The Athletic, who said the cliff earlier this week. But look, it's not just anecdotal. It's not just me watching Cliff Kingsbury's offenses completely fall apart. You know that the data supports it as well.
Absolutely. Next Gen Stats has it. Cliff Kingsbury coached teams, whether as an offensive coordinator or a head coach, Tyler, 52, 36, and 1. Not bad, August through October, but come November or later since 2013. So this also goes back to college. Those Cliff Kingsbury coach teams, 18 and now 46. This is the time of the year where the Cliff Kingsbury offense hits its wall.
Yeah, 100%. And while the Commanders are falling back down to earth, the Philadelphia Eagles are rising and playing their best football and creating even more separation within the division. And it just makes you think, like, you know, this is why people say the NFL season doesn't start until Thanksgiving, the old Bill Parcells thing, you know, because we thought Jaden Daniels, MVP, the Commanders are the real deal. And I mean, they could finish the season at 500 at the way that they're playing right now, although they had that big offensive explosion at the end of the game. I don't think that you can look at that and kind of dismiss some of the issues that they've had, especially with a Dallas Cowboys team that had absolutely no business winning a road game in this one. You have to be very concerned with what we're seeing in DC.
Yeah, pretty putrid team to drop a game to when it comes to the Dallas Cowboys in this one. And look, you look at the Washington Commanders, like you said, you can't take away that fourth quarter sort of output or outburst, if you will, and say that
Mhm.
that's going to be anything that's sustainable. The Washington Commanders watch their quarterback Jaden Daniels run like crazy out of his mind all throughout moments where he was under pressure, completed just 1 of 9 passes, threw 2 interceptions. So threw more interceptions than he threw completions under pressure in this game, including getting
Mhm.
sacked 4 times. That's something you have to look at and say, okay, well, that's unsustainable. And we know that when it comes to the NFL, stats under pressure mean the whole world of your team, whether or not you're going to be successful or unsuccessful. So that means a lot more than some fourth quarter outburst.
And next week, the Commanders are hosting a Tennessee Titans team that's rolling.
Surgeon.
Okay, all jokes aside, the Titans do have a very formidable defensive front that is completely capable of
Yep.
getting a ton of pressure on Jaden Daniels. And we saw that in the game against the Houston Texans, where the Tennessee Titans go in there at 2-8 and pull off a major upset over the Houston Texans, who were 7-4, now 7-5. They sack CJ Stroud 4 times. They get 2 interceptions. And look, I don't want to sit here and talk Titans. We don't need any home cooking. Everybody's going to get enough of that on Thursday for Thanksgiving. But we do got to talk about this Houston Texans team, who has clearly taken a step back from last year when they were in the Final Four in the AFC. And I think that they may just walk into the playoffs because the AFC South is not a very good division, and the Colts lose again, and the Titans and the Jags are, not serious teams in any way. But this Houston Texans team has serious issues, especially on offense with the offensive line. And you look, they got Will Anderson back. The Nico Autry did play in the game. They get Nico Collins 100% healthy. Like, this Houston team, there's something wrong down there, and they can skate to the playoffs, but they are not 100% healthy in terms of just the operation of their team, not necessarily the injuries.
Yeah, and again, it's the question of sustainability, right? Same thing we just talked
Yes.
about with Jaden Daniels under pressure. The
Yes.
other thing that you need to have at this point in the season, weather's changing, it's getting colder, the run game and your run defense are sometimes going to be what decides your game. I think we saw that on Sunday Night Football. Tony Pollard in this game, rushing for 119 yards, a touchdown on
He's been great.
24 carries. He's been awesome. But here's the thing, 5 runs of over 10 yards up against the Houston Texans in this one. If the Texans aren't going to be able to put a cap on that, and they've shown over the course of the last few games that they're struggling in that area, that's going to be a big thing as the season winds along. Weather gets colder, teams want to run the football, all that. You have to be able to sustain a run defense.
And Joe Mixon has been running the ball at will for most of the season. The Titans held him to 14 for 22. I mean, the Texans' offensive line is a
tough stat
major
line.
weakness, and that's obviously going to show up in the playoffs. And another thing that I pointed out in my game planning leading into this matchup is the Texans' secondary is vulnerable to explosive plays. I know it was a couple of weeks ago, but it's what's on the top of my head. After week 10, the Texans had given up the 6th most explosive plays in the passing game, and the Titans were able to attack downfield. And again, we're talking about the Tennessee Titans, who are 2-8. So when you start to play teams that are serious, like the Chiefs, like the Bills, like the Ravens, even teams like the Broncos, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that the Texans are anywhere near a true contender this year. And I think losing this game at home to a rival in the division that's not a good football team absolutely proves that. But with that being said, one of the good teams that they are going to have to deal with is the Kansas City Chiefs. But just how good are the Kansas City Chiefs? We'll talk about that. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. History, economics, the great works of literature, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution. Did you study these things in school? Probably not. Or even if you did, it's probably time for a refresher. Time and technology have changed a lot of things, but they have not changed the basic fundamental truths about our world and our place in it. Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses that include things like Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, or my favorite, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever, you can tune in wherever, plus you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. Hillsdale.edu/lockedon. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money action on sports. That's why they have over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks makes daily fantasy sports accessible to all because all you got to do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Right now, Prize Picks has a great offer. You can get a free Thanksgiving square. Tyreek Hill only needs to receive over 0.5 receiving yards for the projection to hit. And if you're correct on at least one more stat projection, you can win real cash. Again, 2 to 6 players, say more or less, and you got a chance to win big time money. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, Ross, let's continue today's Week 12 recap edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We talked about 2 teams that are collapsing right in front of our eyes, in the Commanders and the Texans. Now we got to talk about 2 teams that won their games, but didn't really inspire a lot of confidence in what they can do going forward. Now, one team, I don't know if I believe in. The other team, I do, but we'll flesh that all out. Before we do, thanks again for making Locked On NFL your first listen. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure that you get subscribed. Stay subscribed. All right. With that being said, though, we got to look at the Kansas City Chiefs because I think one of the more surprising outcomes of the entire week is that the Kansas City Chiefs went to Carolina and barely won by the skin of their teeth with a field goal at the end. Got a kicker off the Jets practice squad, and he was able to nail a 31-yarder to win this game. But the Panthers made it very, very close, scoring 11 points in the fourth quarter. And, you know, this Chiefs team, they just don't have the same ability that we've seen from recent years. And my guy, Chris Clark from Locked On Chiefs, talked about that.
Chiefs find a way to make it to 10-1 on the season, winning 30-27 against the Carolina Panthers. Absolutely not the way you wanted this game to turn out. Kansas City had a 2-score lead throughout most of this game, and they ended up letting it get down and get close. Panthers scored with just under 2 minutes to go. Kansas City got the ball, went down the field, and got in position for a field goal to win the game by Spencer Schrader, the kicker that is replacing Harrison Butker so far and is doing a great job for him. This is absolutely not the way you wanted this game to go. Kansas City needed to come out and dominate. They didn't do that. They allowed a team that shouldn't have scored close to 30 points, score 27 on them, but they did find a way to get it done. They scored 30 themselves. There's much more over on Locked On Chiefs.
Look, Ross, you know the saying, good teams win, great teams cover. And the Chiefs were far, far from covering that 10.5-point spread.
Yeah, man, they absolutely were. And I'll tell you where my biggest concern is for this Kansas City Chiefs team right now is, I think you give up 27 points to the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, you're going to be concerned about your defense. How about that offensive line? The Carolina Panthers came into this game with just 12 sacks on the season, got 5 of them things up against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Nearly half of their season sack total through 10 games they got in this one game. That's not a good look for the Kansas City Chiefs, who, they need that quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, to stay as healthy as he can because he's the most consistent weapon that this team has right now.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, they went out and got DJ Humphries this week. And I think, they're only doing that because they're desperate for help. And we talked about the Texans and why I have some doubts about the Texans because the offensive line in the playoffs is so crucial. Probably a feather in the cap to the Buffalo Bills. If we're talking AFC contenders, they clearly have the best offensive line. Maybe even the Chargers are a team that we could talk about with a pretty solid offensive line, at least on the outsides. But look, at the end of the day, Ross, there's no way that I'm going to waver in my faith for the Kansas City Chiefs. Shout out to my guy, Alex Clancy from Locked On Cardinals. It's Patrick Mahomes until it isn't. And I think a lot of this regular season malaise, the the Chiefs, it's human nature, man. We're going to play the Panthers. We're the Chiefs, defending champs, 2-time. Like, I know that there are serious issues to point to, but at the end of the day, until the Chiefs lose in the playoffs, I'm not going to fret.
Yeah, look, it's also an AFC team playing this random NFC South opponent.
Right.
These teams don't meet very often, especially in a situation where they have to travel and go and play in what is one of the NFL's most empty stadiums, but still an interesting venue to play in. It's a wildly different situation there. And so we can maybe chalk it up to a little bit of unfamiliarity. And the Carolina Panthers, who have looked better over the course of recent weeks than they did earlier on in the season. I will give them that as well.
And not just the Panthers. Bryce Young, 21 of 35, 263, a touchdown.
That's the metric of success on the season is, does Bryce Young look better at the end of 2024 than he did in 2023? So far, so good here over the last few games.
Which another example of why it's so silly that they tried to play Andy Dalton over him. And if not for Dalton getting banged up, he might not have come back in. It's the same thing with the Colts and Anthony Richardson. Like, what are we doing? But with that being said, the Minnesota Vikings blow a huge lead against the Bears, have to get a field goal in overtime after losing an onside kick. The Vikings, man, I just can't trust them. But I know my boy Luke Braun, the brain, he never doubted it for a second.
Okay, I'm a little shaky after that one. After a game that felt like it was going to be a little bit no drama, Vikings led, 27-16. The Bears get a touchdown, 2-point onside kick, bring it back, force overtime, but a 3-and-out and a long drive the other way. The Vikings clear it out and actually take a win to go to 9-2. This was a wild one at the end, probably way more wild than it had any right to be. We're about to go on to the Minnesota football party and talk about it, but first, real quick, Sam Darnold on a bad foot, had to come out of the game for 2 plays, and then engineered just absolutely efficient, cold, mechanical football for the last 2 drives to kick 2 field goals that ended up being the difference here. The Vikings defense absolutely nails until 2 minutes. Most of the problems they had were in 2 minutes, but they ended up sealing this one on a Jonathan Grenard sack, mostly in overtime. That comes on a drop 8 coverage. All kinds of great stuff to talk about. We'll see you on the postcast and on Locked On Vikings.
Look, the Vikings defense, it's great, but over the last few weeks, I mean, Will Levis kind of cut him up a little bit. I know people are going to say that was a 10-point loss. What do you mean? But watch the tape. Will Levis had his best game of the season against that Vikings defense and under pressure. You let Caleb Williams do what Caleb Williams did out there. 340 yards, 2 touchdowns. I know they played well, but the Vikings just have this stink to them where they kind of don't do the right things in the clutch. So Sam Darnold gets his credit. They got the win, but I'm putting the Eagles and the Lions steps ahead of the Vikings in the NFC.
Yeah, there's a gap right there for sure in terms of anything behind them or anything ahead of the Vikings for that matter. Look, having to go to overtime to win by 3 points against the Chicago Bears is nasty work. I get that it's a division game, but we just gave the Kansas City Chiefs crap for losing to the Carolina Panthers, an unfamiliar team. This is a team you play twice a year, and that's played you twice a year. You don't go to the Chicago Bears if you're the Minnesota Vikings in this situation and lose by 3 points, or excuse me, win by 3 points in overtime. That's nasty work. So I think the Minnesota Vikings still have a lot to prove, at least if they're trying to prove anything to me.
Yeah, I mean, if this defense is supposed to be some lockdown, ultimate defense that wins you playoff games, you can't give up 17 points in the fourth quarter to Caleb Williams in this Bears offense, even with Thomas Brown as the OC.
Yeah, and to go outside of your characteristics. This was the 3rd lowest blitz percentage of the Minnesota Vikings so far this season. Why do that against a rookie quarterback? Send the house. What are you doing?
Yeah, and they were letting Caleb Williams out of the pocket all the time because he had all these rushing lanes and just letting him kind of operate. It didn't make a ton of sense. But either way, speaking of the NFC, I just mentioned the Philadelphia Eagles, and there is a reason why we are putting the Philadelphia Eagles a few notches ahead of the Minnesota Vikings. And boy, are they on a roll, and they might have the MVP of the NFL in their backfield and Saquon Barkley. It's Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the second half of the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. And I love the drive bets. Team going to punt, going to score a touchdown on this next drive, who's going to get a catch on the next drive. I love all those bets. If you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can open up the FanDuel Sportsbook app. You can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same exact page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started, again, with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Maybe you want to throw a $5 bet on Saquon Barkley to win MVP. Maybe. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Ross, we are going to cap off today's edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Talked about the Commanders and the Texans collapsing in front of our eyes. Talked about the Vikings and the Chiefs not getting a lot of confidence, even though they won their games. But now we got to look at this Sunday night football game where Saquon Barkley literally went insane. And my guy Gino, who typically would be on here, but he was obviously busy watching one of the best performances we've ever seen from a running back in NFL history, as Saquon Barkley goes for 300-plus yards and puts himself squarely in the MVP conversation.
Saquon Barkley deserves a Hollywood Walk of Fame star after this performance. I'm Gino Camilleri, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, and the Philadelphia Eagles walk out of LA with a win, 37-20, and Saquon Barkley, man, oh man, did he put on a show with over 300 yards from scrimmage, over 250 yards on the ground, setting an Eagles franchise record for rushing. He is worth more than the $12 million that he is getting paid. And man, oh man, what a performance from Vic Fangio and the defense. After they allowed a quick touchdown to the Rams, they only allowed 6 points the rest of the game outside of a touchdown in garbage time. They moved to 7 straight victories, 2 games ahead of Washington in the win column, 3 ahead in the loss column. Tune in for more as we continue to recap this game. I'm Gino Camilleri, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line of the Eagles, A.J. Brown making plays. I believe it was me and the data queen herself, Michelle Majuk. We did a Who Do You Trust between teams in the AFC, teams in the NFC, outside of the favorites. And I had the Eagles way more than the Vikings. And this week just confirms it even more. Yep. They have studs. And at the end of the day, you get into the playoffs, your big-time players have to make big-time plays. Jalen Carter up front, Brandon Graham at 89 years old, still making plays for the Eagles. On offense, A.J. Brown is a tour de force, man. Still gives me nightmares that the Titans let go of A.J. Brown. And then Saquon Barkley, of course, who, I mean, him and Derrick Henry are fighting for it. But if you had to pick between the two, I'm sorry, I'm taking Saquon Barkley. He's a more versatile guy. That is, to me, it's pretty clear cut what you would want there. So if all things are equal, I'm always going with the team with more dudes, and the Eagles just continue to prove that they got the dudes to win every single week.
Yeah, we talked about sustainability, right? Great run game, fantastic offensive line, well-coached offensive line on top of that. It's one thing to have the talent. Yep, it's one thing to have the talent. It's entirely different to be able to hone it and be able to coach it. And then you look at what the defense is able to do as well, with some young stars all over that defense too, along with some of the veteran guys. And just imagine, Tyler, for a second, imagine how the New York Giants have to be feeling right now. I mean, a dismal organization that just got its butt kicked again this week after going to Tommy Cutlets, benching and then eventually having to release Daniel Jones. And then you sit down on a Sunday night hoping to relax and, ice some of those sores, and instead 302 yards dropped in the head of Los Angeles Rams, and you just had to watch that. If you're a New York Giants, anything tough.
Look, I'm not gonna deny that it's probably tough. The emotions of seeing it can't feel good. It's somebody watching Derrick Henry do fantastic this year. Sure. I know quite a bit about that. But let me I feel the need to push back on this narrative a little bit
yeah.
that people push every time Saquon Barkley has a good game. The reality is, I think it was the right decision to let Saquon Barkley go. I think Tyrone Tracy has been one of the best players on the Giants this year. He's been a fantastic addition as a rookie running back. And the issues that the Giants have right now have nothing to do with bringing Saquon Barkley back. If they would have brought Saquon Barkley back and paid him what the Eagles did, Saquon would not be doing this. It would not have changed the Giants season in any fundamental way. They don't have a quarterback. They don't have a good offensive line. Like, those are problems that the Giants could not solve by bringing Saquon Barkley back, and they would not have been solved anytime while Saquon Barkley is in the deal. So, to me, I do agree. You don't let go of good players. Saquon Barkley is a fantastic player. It definitely has to hurt Giants fans to watch it. But Saquon Barkley, you could put him on the Giants right now, and I don't think it changes how many wins they have this year. And some people would say Tyrone Tracy fumbled the ball in that one. Well, Saquon Barkley dropped a game-winning touchdown pass for the Eagles in the beginning of the season. So I call that even. I get it, and it is embarrassing, and I get all the jokes and all that, but the Giants' issues go way deeper than a running back, and I don't think that Saquon Barkley would have made a difference. So just not against you, but in general, I push back on the idea.
I'm sure Tyrone Tracy's 42 rushing yards against Tampa Bay Buccaneers agree with you. I'll just say,
But he didn't have 42 rushing yards because he's not good. You know what I mean? Like, Giants.
Hey, no, I'm pro Tyrone Tracy. I'm pro Tyrone Tracy.
Right,
I wanted him in New Orleans. I wanted him in New Orleans bad.
Yeah, I get. I'll just say this too. Like, one thing with the Giants, their players are pushing back. Malik Neighbors is questioning the play calling, which no shock. He didn't want to go there and play with Daniel Jones anyway. You have players publicly saying Daniel Jones should still be the quarterback. Like, they feel betrayed by the organization for what they did to Daniel Jones, whether he played good, bad, indifferent. Those guys care about how players are treated in there. The Giants organization can say, we're going to keep Brian Dable and Joe Schoen around. They can't do that. They can't do that. They have to totally change everything.
Clock's ticking on that one. I think Tony might be talking about that tomorrow or later today, rather.
Yeah, right. 100%. I mean, that's obviously a big storyline, and that they really have no choice at this point. They've kind of forced them to do it. But anyways, let's just say something about the Rams. They played. They were on television. The Rams are.
That's it. What do you mean? They played and they were on television.
I know that, they're 5-6. The Seahawks are 6-5. It's not out of the realm of possibility. They're a good football team, but
no doubt,
isn't good enough. The Rams aren't doing anything.
But we can pound the table now for Saquon as MVP, right? Like, over the quarterback award, like, if there's anybody at this point, like, he's on track. He's got over 1,300 yards, almost 1,400 yards. He's averaging over 120 rushing yards per game. He's on track for 2,000 rushing yards. If he gets to 2,000 rushing yards, he has to be, at least give me this, Tyler, he has to be the best non-quarterback option right now.
Oh, well, that's without a doubt. That's without a doubt.
Right. But we know the quarterback bias. We know all that. We're not talking about what will be. We're talking about what should be. He's got to be in that conversation.
He absolutely deserves to be. And the last thing I'll say about this, though, is, Ross, Derrick Henry went for 2,000 rushing yards.
I know
in 2020. The Titans were one of the top 3 seeds in the AFC, and Derrick Henry did not win MVP. So I don't care what Saquon Barkley does. He's not allowed to win it, because that would be East Coast bias, and I'm not having it. God, it's ridiculous. But anyway, I'll be done with the home cooking, but it is Thanksgiving week, so a little bit of that. But that is going to do it for us here on the Locked On NFL podcast, a big-time recap of Week 12. I am your host, the Madman Tyler Rowland, for my esteemed co-host, the Mastermind Ross Jackson. That'll do it for Locked On NFL. Make sure that you check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins. Step into the barbershop and chop up some of the best NFL topics coming out of a great weekend of football. The season's going fast, folks. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed, year-round football content for free here on the Locked On NFL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And as I tell you, every single episode, stay safe out there.